Hey vinyl community, how you doing? It's Matt. I know it's been a long time and I'm back. I don't know what the heck that was prior to me posting this video. Someone claimed to be Invisible Matt or something, came in here and took over my channel basically. But I kicked his butt out of here. He's gone and I'm back to do a couple of videos for you today. So I think I'll get right to it. And the first thing I'm going to do is try to keep this as brief as I can. Just to let you know, I haven't been around for a while. I've been busy with a lot of stuff, but I am back. I've never disappeared. I've always been watching channels and whatnot and commenting when I can. Basically, it's just been craziness, you know, busy life and those types of things. But I am back. I haven't really gone anywhere. And but I have streamlined my channel a little bit. I've trimmed the fat, so to speak. I got rid of a lot of my older videos that were kind of not getting many hits. You know, they were probably not the best videos in the world, so I decided to cut things down a little bit, streamline my videos. I'm going to try to keep my videos a little shorter, more concise if I can. I mean, I tend to gab, so that may change, but do the best I can. Anyway, I want to get this one out real quick because it's a long overdue response to Beatle James, who did a great video a long time ago, I know, and I'm late to the party here, but I thought I'd give my 2 cents real quick, and it was about being a fan of the Beatles when no one else was. And let me go back real quick. First of all, to give a generalized statement, I can only think of one time in my life where I felt I was on an island when it came to the Beatles, where I felt I was alone and there wasn't a lot of real hardcore fans out there like me. One period in my life, and I will talk about that period shortly. The rest of the time, I have to say, for the most part, I've always felt that I was able to locate and find other Beatle fans, make friends with them, talk Beatles, share Beatles, trade, whatnot. All that stuff has happened throughout my life, and I'll just talk about the one period right now. First of all, let me say in the 60s, obviously, I'm a first-generation fan. I was born in '61. So I was cognizant of the Beatles and aware of them in '64. My parents bought me 2 albums to listen to. If you go back to my very first video, which I still keep posted here on my channel, you'll see that video where I talk about Meet the Beatles and the Hard Day's Night album and how my parents got them for me in '64 and how I basically went through the 60s loving the Beatles, growing up with the Beatles. My older cousins were into them. So obviously when the Beatles were still together, they were relevant, they were the happening thing, and so there were tons of Beatle fans out there. Coming into the early 70s, junior high school, I still felt that because those first 5 years of the 70s, you gotta figure the Beatles were still very, very active. They were very popular as solo artists, tons of hits, hit albums. Look at Ringo himself in 1973 with the Ringo album, was a huge seller with numerous top 40 singles. George had All Things Must Pass, Living in the Material World was a big album. He had #1 singles, top hits. Paul, goes without saying, he had top hits with Band on the Run, Ram, all the singles from these albums, My Love from Red Rose Speedway. Even coming into '75, if you want to go that far and say, with the Venus and Mars album, he had some big hits and big hit albums. John, up until '75, when he went on his self-imposed retirement there for a few years, he had big hits. I mean, top 40, #1 hits. Walls and Bridges, big album, okay? Mind Games, even though some people don't like that album as much, big seller. The Imagine album, his first solo album, John was relevant. John was having hit albums. So the first 5 years of the 70s, I thought there were plenty of people out there who were into the Beatles, into the solo career. It was a happening thing. The only period in my life where I felt I was alone on an island was that period when I was in high school, from about '75 till 1980, that 5-year block after John went into retirement and I went into high school. And so much in music was changing in the mid to late 70s with, you know, corporate rock was big, and, you know, the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, Kiss, Styx, REO Speedwagon, Foreigner, I can go on, Aerosmith, all these big classic, or now known as classic rock bands now, and classic artists, Rod Stewart, they were the big things in the late 70s, and disco was emerging. Obviously, punk and new wave had come in, but it was kind of still on the underground. It wasn't in the mainstream. So the big stuff was the corporate rock, you know, Boston, Kansas, groups like that. And that's what all the kids in high school were in when I went to high school. Now, I like that stuff. I own stuff by every one of those artists, I'm sure. I'm sure I can dig out some Foreigner or Boston or Styx for you, or Journey or REO Speedwagon, all that stuff. Aerosmith I even have. But that wasn't my main thing. Although I liked that stuff, I was mainly into kind of the Beatles still, the British Invasion stuff, the Kinks, the Who, all that stuff. I was just really getting into that stuff heavily because I had been into it since I was a little kid in the 60s. And a lot of kids in high school didn't understand that. They didn't understand that I was still into things like the Kinks or the Beatles when all this stuff was happening with Kiss and the corporate rock bands and the big arena bands and that stuff that was happening in the mid to late 70s. So I got made fun of a lot. You know, kids picked on me if I wore a Beatles shirt outside of school or something, or I was talking about the Beatles in school. You know, you got the real jerky kids like we all had to deal with, and they would pick on me a little bit. And I remember Joe in his video to James said something like he had a kid he knew who would say, you know, we all live in a yellow submarine, and then go, duh, 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 after he said yellow submarine, duh. And I kind of laughed at that because I kind of went through the same thing, only as with somebody, he would sing it in a real high-pitched voice. He'd go, oh, the Beatles, we all live in a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine. You know, making fun of it, that it was a kiddie song and the Beatles were a kiddie band. And, you know, obviously now it's laughable to think that this kid thought the Beatles as being a kiddie band or a silly band. It's just kind of, you wonder what that guy's listening to nowadays. But at the time, you know, when you're a 16, 15-year-old kid, you take it to heart. You say, you know, why don't the other kids like the Beatles as much as I do? And they just didn't. Or they did, but they were keeping it hidden because they were into the in thing at the time, which was, like I said, you know, Kiss and the corporate rock bands, the arena bands, and, you know, obviously some kids were into more of the pop stuff that was in the top 40 back then, and disco was starting to emerge, the Bee Gees, Andy Gibb, you know, that type of stuff. So the Beatles were kind of on the back burner there, I thought, for 4 or 5 years of my life. I think after John died is when a turnaround happened, at least in my life, with a lot of people. When John passed away, I think there was a lot of sadness with people that it was, you know, the end of an era, the end of their youthful innocence. And I feel during the 80s, the Beatles really started to make a comeback with people. People starting then to appreciate what they were and what they meant. I really think that started to happen in the 80s. The 80s is when I started going to conventions, when I was getting into my early 20s and into my 20s. And I was meeting other Beatle fans. I would read the paper more in those days and look for Beatles fanzines I could order. I think I ordered a fanzine way back when. I forget the name of it now. I think it was called Good Day Sunshine. It was up here in the Northeast. And that put you in touch with other Beatle fans, and also the, like I say, events. You could read about these events and attend them, whether it be small conventions or other types of activities. So the 80s, I felt, was a resurgence for me with finding and meeting other Beatle fans. I didn't feel so much then that I was the only fan, or you know, being into the Beatles when no one else wasn't. 80s, I felt a lot of people were starting to get back into the Beatles and appreciate them. Certainly, and with all the releases that happened throughout the years, coming into the 90s, obviously, it all culminated in the early to mid-90s with the anthology, and certainly the One album in 2000. And let's go back to the 90s, the early to mid-90s, when people really started getting into the internet and being able to go online and look up things and find all kinds of chat sites and whatever they used to call them back then. That's when you could really meet a lot of other fans. You could learn firsthand within seconds about upcoming events, shows, tribute shows, conventions, new releases coming out, things to do, movies, movie nights. All these fun things having to do with the Beatles you could learn about once the internet came in. So at least at the minimum, by the time the internet came in the early to mid-90s, there was no excuse for anyone to say they felt like they were not into the Beatles. They couldn't find someone else into the Beatles anymore. I'm sorry. You had to. I mean, if you wanted to find other like-minded fans and be able to email them, write them, stay in touch with them, meet up with them if they lived closer to you, once the internet came in, you could do that. You could meet other fans and participate in activities. So again, and obviously it goes without saying today with the technology we have, like right here with YouTube and other technology, there's no reason we can't meet other fans, feel like we're not on an island anymore, that there's a whole group of tons of fans out there that appreciate the Beatles and their music as much as we do and have all of our lives. So again, just to culminate this and wrap it all up, the only time I really felt on an island was in that late 70s period, from like 75 till 1980 when John died. I was in high school. It was brutal. There wasn't a lot, I couldn't find a lot of fans then, a lot of picking on the Beatles and making fun of them, but that's what it's all about, I guess, when you're that age and in high school. All the kids, or the majority of them anyway, were into their own things, and there was no social media to link kids up together that liked the Beatles, so that's the only time I really felt alone. So that's it. Other than that, thanks James for starting this thread. I think it was a great idea. I'm sorry I'm late to the party here, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents and say it's so nice now in 2018 that if you're a young kid growing up, you don't have to hunt anymore. You just couple of clicks on the internet, or buying some fanzines and getting involved, and you can meet tons of other fans and be in touch with them and feel like you're part of the community, the Beatles community. So thanks again, all the best, God bless, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.